I am Ethan Mitchell, 28 years old, and the invisible son in a family that only had eyes for my brother. Growing up, Marcus was their golden child, talented, charming, and utterly entitled. While my parents celebrated his every move, they ignored the way he systematically destroyed my belongings, stole my achievements, and crushed my spirit. At 21, I finally escaped that toxic household building, a life they knew nothing about. Now, after 7 years of silence, they have suddenly reached out not to apologize, but because they need something from me. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and finding your worth. My earliest memories were actually happy ones. Before Marcus came along, when I was about 6 years old, I remember weekends filled with trips to the park, my dad teaching me to throw a baseball, and my mom baking cookies with me, standing on a chair beside her. I was their only child, then the center of their world. I still have a faded photograph from that time, all three of us, with ice cream smeared faces, genuinely smiling. Sometimes I look at it and wonder if I imagined those days. Everything changed when Marcus was born. Initially, I was excited to be a big brother. I remember peering into his crib, making silly faces to make him laugh. For a while, things seemed normal, the natural adjustment of becoming a family of 4. But by the time I turned 8, a pattern had emerged that would define the next 13 years of my life. The Christmas, when I was 9, crystallized the new reality. I had been hoping for a set of art supplies I had circled in the catalog for months. Instead, I unwrapped practical items: socks, a school backpack, and a math workbook. Meanwhile, Marcus, at just 3 years old, received an elaborate electric train, set a miniature car he could actually ride in, and what seemed like dozens of toys that quickly spilled into my side of the room we shared. When I couldn't hide my disappointment, my mother pulled me aside. "You are older, Ethan. You should understand that little kids need more toys. Besides, you should be grateful for what you got." That became the familiar refrain I needed to be more mature, more understanding, more grateful. My feelings were consistently invalidated, while Marcus's were treated as paramount. School achievements followed the same pattern. When I brought home straight, as my parents would nod distractedly, "That is what we expect from you," they would say, never acknowledging the hours of study it took. But when Marcus managed to get a C+ on a spelling test after weeks of D's, my parents took him out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement. His mediocre baseball games warranted enthusiastic attendance from both parents, while my science fair competitions, even when I placed first in the district, often had me standing alone looking for faces in the crowd that never appeared. My developing passion for art and technology was dismissed as just hobbies. When I asked for drawing classes after a teacher mentioned my talent, my mother said we couldn't afford extras like that. 2 weeks later, Marcus was enrolled in private baseball coaching because he showed real potential. The most painful memory from those early years happened on my 12th birthday. My parents had promised a small party with a few friends at the local pizza place. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, especially since I struggled to make friends, and this felt like a rare chance to connect with classmates outside of school. The morning of my birthday, my dad approached me with an apologetic look. "Marcus's baseball team made the regional playoffs. The game is this afternoon, so we will have to cancel your party. We can reschedule. Maybe next weekend." But we never did reschedule. My birthday was forgotten, in the excitement of Marcus's team coming in 3rd place. When I finally broke down crying that night, my dad awkwardly patted my shoulder and said, "There will be other birthdays, buddy. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for your brother." My main coping mechanism became immersing myself in academics and art. If I couldn't get their attention through achievement, at least these pursuits gave me a sense of personal satisfaction and escape. I would stay late at school to use the computer lab, teaching myself programming and digital design, since we only had one home computer that Marcus frequently monopolized. It was around this time that I met Jake Wilson in 7th grade art class. He was the first person who actually saw me, really saw me. When I hesitantly shared some of my home situation, expecting the usual, "But he is your brother," dismissal, Jake instead furrowed his brow and said, "That is messed up, man. You do not deserve that." Those simple words were revolutionary to me. The idea that I deserved better had never been suggested before. There were rare moments when I caught glimpses of what could have been. Occasionally, my dad would wander into the garage, where I was working on a computer I had assembled from discarded parts. He would watch silently for a while, then ask questions that showed genuine interest. Those moments felt precious little islands of connection in an ocean of indifference, but they never lasted. Marcus would call from the house, or my mom would remind Dad they needed to take Marcus somewhere, and the moment would evaporate. By 14, I had become painfully aware of the pattern, yet somewhere deep inside, I still harbored hope that things would change, that eventually my parents would see me too. I did not yet understand how entrenched the family dynamic had become, or how much worse things would get as Marcus entered his teenage years and discovered new ways to assert his dominance in our family hierarchy. High school should have been my escape. I excelled academically, making honor roll every semester and even winning awards in district-wide technology competitions. But my achievements continued to be met with the same tepid acknowledgement from my parents. Good job, they would say, before quickly changing the subject to Marcus's latest exploits on the baseball field. Meanwhile, Marcus's grades were slipping dramatically as he entered high school. He barely maintained the C average required to stay on the baseball team, yet my parents never expressed the disappointment they surely would have shown if I had brought home such marks. Instead, they praised him for balancing sports and academics as if his mediocrity was actually an achievement. The incident with my science project marked a turning point in how bold Marcus had become. I had spent 3 months developing a complex computer program that simulated ecosystem changes. It was sophisticated enough that my science teacher had suggested I consider submitting it for state-level competitions. The night before the presentation, I left it running a final test and went to shower. When I returned, I found Marcus sitting at my desk, and my program was completely corrupted. Hours of work gone. "What did you do?" I demanded, panic rising in my throat. Marcus shrugged casually. "I was just looking. It must have crashed on its own. Your coding probably sucked anyway." When I told my parents what happened, their response stunned me. "You should have saved backups," my father said sternly, "and you shouldn't leave your projects until the last minute." Besides, my mother added, he was just curious about your work. You should be flattered that your brother is interested in what you do. That was the moment I realized they would always take his side, regardless of the evidence or circumstances. It wasn't just preferential treatment anymore, it was a complete inability to hold Marcus accountable for anything. As Marcus entered his later teens, he began regularly raiding my room. Money would disappear from my wallet. CDs and games would vanish only to appear in his room later. When I confronted him, he would either deny it outright or claim he was just borrowing my things. The few times I managed to prove to my parents that he had taken something, their response was always the same. "Brothers share things, Ethan. Don't be so selfish." The invasions of privacy became so frequent that I bought a lock for my bedroom door with money from my part-time job at the local electronics store. My parents were furious when they discovered it. "What are you hiding that you need to lock your door?" my mother demanded. "I am not hiding anything. I am protecting my stuff from Marcus," I explained. "This is ridiculous," my father snapped. "Take that lock off immediately. This is our house, and there will be no locked doors." The lock came off, and the raids continued. I began hiding my valuables in increasingly creative places inside hollowed-out books, taped under drawers inside my box spring mattress. Living in my own home had become a constant state of vigilance and anxiety. I started having trouble sleeping, lying awake, listening for the sound of my door creaking open in the night. A guidance counselor at school noticed my withdrawal and the dark circles under my eyes. When she asked if everything was okay at home, I nearly broke down. But years of conditioning had taught me that complaining about Marcus would only make things worse, so I mumbled something about studying too hard and changed the subject. Marcus's verbal abuse escalated alongside his theft. He began calling me loser nerd, and worse, often right in front of our parents. When I protested, my parents would sigh and say, "Brothers tease each other, Ethan. You are too sensitive." The gaslighting was so constant that I began to question my own perceptions. Was I being too sensitive? Was this normal sibling behavior? The incident that answered that question definitively happened on my 16th birthday. I had been saving for months from my part-time job to pay for driver's education classes. The night before, I was set to register my savings envelope disappeared from its hiding place. That same evening, Marcus's car, which my parents had given him when he turned 16, broke down. The next day, I overheard my mother telling a friend on the phone how they had borrowed money from me to fix Marcus's car. "Ethan does not really need driving lessons right now anyway," she said casually, as if my efforts and goals meant nothing. When I confronted them, my father's response was, "The family needed that money more. You will understand when you are older that family comes first." The irony of his statement was crushing. Family first except for me. I wasn't considered part of that equation. It was around this time that I started spending more time at Jake's house, where I witnessed a completely different family dynamic. Jake and his sister disagreed, and even argued occasionally, but their parents mediated fairly. Neither child was obviously favored. They respected each other's belongings and space. Watching their normal interactions made the dysfunction of my own family even more apparent and painful. By the end of my junior year of high school, I had stopped expecting fairness or support at home. I was merely surviving until I could escape to college. My grades and extracurricular activities, all carefully calculated to maximize my scholarship opportunities. I had come to the painful realization that what was happening in my home wasn't normal sibling rivalry. It was something far more damaging, and it wouldn't get better on its own. My senior year of high school should have been focused on college applications and planning my future. Instead, it became an even more intense battlefield when Marcus, then 21, dropped out of community college and moved back home. He had lasted barely 3 semesters, failing most of his classes and losing his baseball scholarship due to poor academic performance. Yet somehow his return was treated not as the failure it was, but as an opportunity for a fresh start. Meanwhile, I was excelling. My hard work had paid off with acceptance letters from several good universities, including 2 that offered substantial merit scholarships. I had kept these letters hidden from my family, retrieving them quickly from the mailbox before anyone else could see them. I knew instinctively that my success would somehow be weaponized against me. I was right. When my parents eventually discovered the acceptance letters, instead of pride, their reaction was concern about finances. "These schools are so expensive, Ethan," my mother fretted, despite the scholarship offers clearly stated in the letters. The responsible thing would be to attend community college like Marcus did. We need to save money for when Marcus decides what he wants to do next. The implication was clear: my education was less important than keeping funds available for whatever Marcus might want in the future. It was a gut punch, but one I had sadly come to expect. Things escalated rapidly from there. One afternoon, I returned from my part-time job to find my laptop missing. This wasn't just any laptop. It contained all my college application materials, essays, and a portfolio of my digital art projects. After searching frantically, I found it in Marcus's room, the screen cracked and several keys missing. When confronted, Marcus shrugged. "I needed a computer for a job application. Yours was just sitting there." "Why is the screen cracked? And what happened to the keys?" I demanded. "It was like that when I found it. You should take better care of your stuff," he said with a smirk that only I could see. My parents' response: "It was an accident, Ethan, and Marcus was trying to find a job. You should be supportive of that." I had to spend $300 from my savings to repair the laptop money that had been earmarked for college expenses. The incidents kept coming. After I had saved enough to buy a used car, a 15-year-old Honda that barely ran but was mine, Marcus began borrowing it without permission. One night, he took my keys while I was sleeping and returned the car the next morning with a dented fender and empty gas tank. "Some idiot hit me in a parking lot," he explained casually at breakfast. "Not a big deal." But it was a big deal when the insurance company got involved. Since Marcus wasn't listed on my policy, my parents insisted we not report it to insurance. Instead, they decided that I would pay for the repairs from my college fund because, as my father put it, "You should have been more careful with your keys." The most devastating blow came just 2 months before graduation. I had been building an art portfolio for years, hoping to double major in computer science and graphic design. My art teacher had helped me organize my best pieces, and I had carefully stored them in a portfolio case in my closet. One day I came home to find the portfolio on the floor of my room, many of the pieces torn or stained with what smelled like beer. Marcus claimed he had been looking for something else in my closet, and the portfolio had fallen. When I exploded in anger, Marcus shoved me against the wall, his face inches from mine. "Watch your tone, little brother," he snarled. The worst part. My parents witnessed the shove, but focused entirely on calming me down. "Ethan, you need to control your temper," my mother said. "You provoked him by yelling." That night, I confided in Raymond Cooper, my manager at the electronics store, where I worked part-time. Raymond was in his 50s, a calm, steady presence who had always treated me with respect. Over the months, he had noticed my deteriorating state and occasionally asked careful questions about my home life. When I finally opened up about everything, Raymond's response was clarifying. "Ethan, what you're describing isn't normal family conflict. It's a toxic dynamic where you're being scapegoated and your brother is being enabled in harmful behavior. This isn't something you can fix by trying harder or being more understanding." His words hit me like a revelation. All these years, I had been trying to earn my parents' love, to be good enough to be treated with the same consideration they automatically gave Marcus. Raymond helped me see that the problem wasn't me, it never had been. The final straw came when my scholarship acceptance letter for my top choice university mysteriously disappeared. This was crucial documentation I needed to secure my financial aid package. When I asked my family if they had seen it, Marcus suggested I had probably thrown it away by accident. After tearing apart my room searching for it, I discovered that Marcus had been intercepting my mail for months. In the back of his closet, I found a stack of opened letters addressed to me, college information, scholarship notifications, even a birthday card from Jake that contained a $20 bill now missing. When I confronted my parents with this evidence, their response left me breathless. "You should have been more careful with your mail," Ethan, my father said. "You know important documents have been coming." Besides, my mother added, "Marcus was probably just trying to organize things for you." Standing there holding the stack of my opened mail, in shaking hands, something finally broke inside me. This wasn't going to change. They weren't going to change. And if I stayed, I would continue to be diminished, gaslit, and mistreated. That night, I made the decision that would alter the course of my life. I needed to escape, not just for my education or future, but for my very survival. Planning my escape required a level of secrecy I had perfected over years of protecting what little I could call my own. I knew that if my parents or Marcus suspected I was planning to leave for good, not just for college, they would find ways to sabotage me. Over the next few weeks, I methodically prepared. First, I secured all my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, high school transcripts, and stored them in a small fireproof box at Jake's house. I opened a new bank account at a different bank from my parents and began transferring my savings in small amounts to avoid raising suspicion. I spoke with my college's financial aid office, directly explaining that I needed all communications sent to Jake's address or via email only. Graduation day arrived with minimal celebration. My parents attended the ceremony, but spent most of it talking about how Marcus had graduated 3 years earlier, conveniently omitting that he had barely passed and subsequently dropped out of college. The contrast to Marcus's graduation party, which had featured a backyard barbecue with extended family and friends, was stark. For me, there was a quick dinner at a chain restaurant where my father spent most of the time checking sports scores on his phone. I waited until a night when both my parents were at a neighborhood function. Marcus was out with friends, which gave me about 4 hours. I packed only what was essential and could fit in my Honda clothes, my repaired laptop, a few books, and the handful of meaningful possessions I had managed to protect from Marcus over the years. I left behind a brief note: "I need space to figure out who I am away from this house. Please do not try to contact me for a while. I will reach out when I am ready. Ethan." I knew the note was probably more consideration than they deserved, but some part of me couldn't leave without any explanation. That night, at 21 years old, I drove away from the only home I had ever known, terrified, but somehow lighter than I had felt in years. The first few weeks were the hardest. I stayed temporarily with Jake, until my college housing became available. His parents, who had witnessed enough of my family dynamic over the years to understand, welcomed me, without judgment. During that time, my phone buzzed with texts and calls from my parents, not so much concerned about my well-being as they were indignant about my dramatic departure. "You always have to make everything about you," my mother texted. "This is really hurting your father and me." Marcus sent a single message, "Running away like a little bitch. Classic Ethan." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on the immediate challenges of independence. Raymond from the electronics store became an unexpected lifeline. When I explained my situation, he connected me with a former colleague who managed an IT department in Boston nearly 500 miles away from my hometown. "They are looking for someone entry-level who is willing to learn," Raymond told me. "The pay isn't great, but it's a foot in the door." I interviewed over the phone and was offered the position. 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into my car once again and drove to Boston, a city where I knew no one but felt anonymous in the best possible way. My first apartment was a tiny studio in a somewhat sketchy neighborhood, but it was mine. I had to learn everything at once: how to set up utilities budget for groceries, cook more than just ramen noodles, do laundry properly. These were all skills my parents had never bothered to teach me, perhaps assuming I would live at home indefinitely like Marcus. Those early months were a crash course in adulting, with plenty of mistakes along the way. I accidentally shrunk half my clothes in the dryer. I bounced a check because I miscalculated my balance. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for a week straight when I underestimated my grocery budget. But each small victory, successfully assembling a bookshelf, negotiating with the cable company, making my first loan payment on time, built my confidence. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to contact me continued, but with decreasing frequency. The calls shifted from demanding to guilt-inducing. "We don't understand why you're punishing us, and Marcus misses you," which I knew was a lie. After about 3 months, I changed my phone number, keeping the new one private, and only sharing it with Jake and Raymond. That first year was transformative. Without the constant undermining and gaslighting, I began to trust my own perceptions again. My work performance earned me a small raise, and I started taking night classes at a local community college to supplement my skills. For the first time in my life, my efforts were recognized on their merits, not diminished in comparison to someone else. It was at a graphic design workshop through the community college that I met Rachel Bennett. Smart, creative, and refreshingly direct, Rachel's presence in my life became another turning point. Our relationship developed slowly. I was still learning how to trust people, but her patience and consistent respect helped heal parts of me I hadn't realized were broken. The most eye-opening aspect of getting to know Rachel was being introduced to her family. Seeing her interactions with her parents and siblings showed me what healthy family dynamics actually looked like. There was disagreement sometimes, even occasional tension, but underneath it all was a foundation of mutual respect that had been completely absent in my own family. They support each other without keeping score. I remember telling my therapist another critical part of my healing journey. They don't weaponize love or use it as a control mechanism. Therapy was challenging but essential. I had to confront the painful reality that what I had experienced was emotional abuse and neglect. There were sessions where I did nothing but cry, grieving for the childhood and family relationship I never had. Other sessions were focused on breaking the patterns I had internalized: the people-pleasing, the tendency to minimize my own needs, the constant fear that any success would somehow be punished. As my therapy progressed and my career steadily advanced, I developed a specialty in UX design that combined my technical skills with my artistic abilities, the very combination my parents had dismissed as impractical. By my 3rd year in Boston, I had moved to a better apartment, was taking classes toward a degree, and had a growing circle of friends who knew and valued the real me. The final break in communication with my family came after a rare phone call from my father. Marcus was starting a business venture, he explained, and needed investors. "We thought, since you're doing so well now, you might want to contribute to your brother's success." There was no interest in my life, no questions about my well-being, just another expectation that I would orbit around Marcus's needs. I declined politely, but firmly, which triggered an angry tirade about family loyalty and my selfishness. That was the last time we spoke for 4 years. By 25, I had achieved a stability and peace I once thought impossible. My relationship with Rachel had deepened, my career was flourishing, and I had begun to understand that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up for you, who sees you clearly, and who celebrates your existence without conditions. Jake, Raymond, Rachel, and the friends I had made in Boston had become my chosen family. I thought the chapter with my biological family was closed for good. I was wrong. At 28, my life had settled into a rhythm I genuinely enjoyed. I had been promoted to senior UX designer at a major tech company. Rachel and I had purchased our first home together, a modest but charming two-bedroom, near a park, and we were discussing marriage and possibly starting a family in the next few years. The wounds from my past had scarred over. They were still part of me, but no longer raw and bleeding. Then came the email that shattered my carefully constructed peace. It appeared in my inbox on an ordinary Tuesday morning from my mother's email address, which I had never blocked because it had been inactive for years. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." My hands trembled as I clicked to open it. "Ethan, I know it has been a long time, and you probably don't want to hear from us. Things have gotten very difficult here. Your father and I are facing some serious problems, and we need your help. Marcus's business has failed, and we are in financial trouble. Please call us. Mom." No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the years of silence or what had caused me to leave. No apology. Just another need, another expectation that I would set aside whatever life I had built to address their problems. The email threw me into emotional turmoil. My first reaction was anger, the audacity of reaching out after 7 years only because they wanted something. Then came curiosity. What exactly had happened? And finally, anxiety. What did I owe these people, if anything? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I shared the email with Rachel that evening and scheduled an emergency session with my therapist the next day. Both conversations helped me process my conflicted feelings. "You don't owe them a response at all," Rachel pointed out. "But I know you well enough to know that not responding will eat at you. Whatever you decide, I support you. Just don't let them pull you back into old patterns." My therapist offered similar counsel, adding, "This is an opportunity to engage from a position of strength with clear boundaries if that's what you choose to do." After 3 days of consideration, I sent a brief reply. I need more information before I can decide if or how I might help. What exactly has happened? I deliberately avoided any emotional language or personal updates about my life. My mother's response came quickly, filling in details that painted a troubling picture. Marcus had started a construction business 3 years earlier, convincing my parents to co-sign on substantial loans and even take a second mortgage on their home to provide startup capital. The business had failed catastrophically due to mismanagement, unpaid taxes, and a lawsuit from his business partner Trevor, alleging that Marcus had misappropriated company funds. My parents were now facing potential bankruptcy and the loss of their home of 35 years. Marcus's marriage to Heather was falling apart under the financial strain, and he had moved back in with my parents, bringing even more tension into the household. There was a desperate tone to my mother's email, but still no acknowledgement of our past. It was as if she expected me to simply step back into my role as the responsible son cleaning up the mess, while Marcus remained the priority. I discussed the situation again with Rachel, who voiced her concerns. "I worry they just see you as a financial solution, not as a son they've missed or want to reconcile with," she said. Where was this urgency to connect during the good times? Her perspective helped strengthen my resolve to maintain boundaries. I agreed to a phone call with my parents, but prepared myself mentally for the conversation, rehearsing responses to potential manipulation tactics. The call was as difficult as I had anticipated. My mother answered, her voice immediately shifting into the guilt-inducing tone I remembered too well. "Ethan, finally. We've been so worried about you all these years." I let the obvious lie pass. "Mom, I got your emails about the financial situation. I'm sorry to hear things are difficult." "It's been terrible," she continued. "Your father's health has suffered from the stress. Marcus is devastated. We just don't know what to do anymore." When I asked for more specific details about the business failure and current debts, she became vague, eventually saying, "Your father can explain it better. Let me get him." My father's voice sounded older, more subdued than I remembered. He outlined the situation more clearly. They had co-signed for loans totaling over $300,000. The business had never been properly insured, and Marcus had apparently been taking money from the company, accounts for personal expenses, while failing to pay suppliers and taxes. We trusted him, my father said, and I heard genuine brokenness in his voice for the first time. We never thought he would. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. For the first time, they were experiencing what I had known my entire childhood, Marcus's true nature, and the consequences of enabling it. As the conversation continued, my father revealed another disturbing detail. Marcus says, if you had been around, if you hadn't abandoned the family, maybe things would have turned out differently. He says you could have helped with the business. The statement was so absurd, I almost laughed. Even now, from hundreds of miles away, after years of no contact, I was somehow being assigned blame for Marcus's failures. Dad, I said firmly, Marcus was stealing from me and destroying my possessions when we lived under the same roof. What makes you think a business partnership would have been any different? There was a long silence before he responded. Maybe you're right. I don't know anymore. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of the past I had ever heard from him. Before ending the call, I agreed to meet them in person, but on my terms. I would come to Boston, not our hometown. We would meet in a public place, and I made no promises about financial assistance. I'll listen, I told them. That's all I can commit to right now. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time, processing the conversation. There was a certain irony to the situation the golden child had led them to ruin, while the scapegoat they had dismissed was now their potential savior. But beneath the irony was a deep sadness for all the wasted years and unnecessary pain. As I prepared for the meeting over the next 2 weeks, I fortified myself with sessions with my therapist and long talks with Rachel. I knew this encounter would test all the boundaries and self-worth I had worked so hard to build. But I also recognized that it represented a potential closing of the circle, a chance to engage with my family not as the invisible, powerless child I had been, but as the strong, capable adult I had become. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop near my office in downtown Boston. I arrived early, securing a corner table that offered some privacy while still being in a public space. When my parents walked in, the sight of them was jarring. They had aged more than the 7 years would suggest, my father's hair now completely gray. My mother's face lined with stress, both moving with the slightly hesitant gait of people carrying invisible burdens. For a moment, an unexpected wave of compassion washed over me. Then I remembered all the times I had needed their compassion and found none, and I steadied myself. The initial greeting was awkward. They seemed uncertain whether to hug me, and I resolved the question by extending my hand for a handshake. We ordered coffee and exchanged stiff pleasantries about the weather, and my mother's comment that Boston seemed like a nice city, as if I were a distant acquaintance who had recently moved there, not their son who had been gone for 7 years. I was just beginning to ask more detailed questions about their financial situation when the door to the coffee shop opened and Marcus walked in. My stomach dropped. He hadn't been part of the agreement. I hope you don't mind, my mother said quickly. Marcus wanted to be here too. This affects him as well. Marcus approached the table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 31, he had put on weight and lost some hair, but the air of entitlement remained unchanged. He extended his hand as if we were business associates meeting at a conference. Little brother, he said with fake warmth. It's been too long. I shook his hand briefly, noticing the expensive watch on his wrist, despite the supposed financial catastrophe. I wasn't expecting you, I said, neutrally. Well, this situation involves all of us, he replied, taking a seat. We're still family after all. The next 20 minutes were surreal. Marcus dominated the conversation, presenting a version of events that painted him as the victim of circumstances beyond his control, unscrupulous suppliers, economic downturns, and his business partner Trevor's misunderstanding about certain financial decisions. I listened silently, observing not just Marcus, but my parents' reactions. They nodded along with his narrative occasionally, adding supportive comments. It was the same dynamic I had grown up with, just with adult problems instead of childhood squabbles. Finally, Marcus got to the point. So we're thinking, if you could help with a loan, say $50,000 to start, we could negotiate with the creditors. and maybe save Mom and Dad's house. A loan, I repeated. And how exactly would this loan be repaid? Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Once I get back on my feet, of course. I've got some promising opportunities already. Like what I asked. He mentioned vague connections and potential investors, none of which sounded concrete. As he talked, I noticed my father looking down at his coffee cup, avoiding eye contact. Let me make sure I understand, I said, when Marcus finally paused. You started a business with inadequate planning. You convinced Mom and Dad to risk their retirement and home. You mismanaged the funds possibly illegally based on this lawsuit from Trevor. Now you want me to give you $50,000 to fix the situation with no clear plan for repayment. Marcus's fake smile faltered. You've always been so judgmental, Ethan. Business involves risk. Sometimes things don't work out. Risk is one thing. Negligence and misappropriation are another. I replied calmly. Have you considered getting a job to help repay what you owe? Marcus's face darkened. I'm an entrepreneur, not some wage slave. Besides, my skills are in management and big-picture thinking. I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. Big-picture thinking. Is that what you call it? My mother jumped in. Ethan, please. We didn't come here to argue. We came because we need help. No, you came because you need money. I corrected her. There's a difference. Something in my tone must have signaled to my parents that this wasn't going as they had planned. My father cleared his throat. Son, we understand why you might be reluctant. We know things weren't always easy between you and Marcus growing up. It was such a profound understatement of my childhood experience that I sat in stunned silence for a moment. Not easy, I finally said. Dad, he systematically destroyed my belongings, stole from me, and physically intimidated me, while you and Mom not only allowed it, but often blamed me for it. And now you're surprised that he's done the same thing to you and others, on a larger scale. My bluntness seemed to shock them. My mother's eyes widened, and my father shifted uncomfortably. That's not true, Marcus interjected, his voice rising. You were always the problem child, always complaining, always needing special attention. Marcus, please, my mother said, glancing around nervously as other customers began to look our way. But Marcus was just getting started. You think you're so much better than everyone, don't you? With your fancy job and your perfect life. You abandoned your family when things got tough, and now you sit in judgment of us. I remained calm, which seemed to infuriate him more. I didn't abandon anyone, Marcus. I escaped an unhealthy environment and built a life for myself. There's a difference there too. So, you're not going to help, he said flatly. I didn't say that, I replied. But I'm not giving you money directly. That would be enabling the same patterns that got everyone into this mess. Marcus stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is bullshit. I knew this was a waste of time. He glared at our parents. You said he would help. You said he had money now. The naked entitlement in his tone was breathtaking. My parents looked trapped between their golden child's anger and their desperate need for my assistance. Marcus, please sit down, my father said, his voice firmer than I remembered ever hearing it when addressing Marcus. Let's hear what Ethan has to say. But Marcus wasn't interested in listening. No, I'm done here. Call me when your precious Ethan decides if his family is worth saving. He stormed out, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. In the quiet that followed, something shifted in the air between me and my parents. For perhaps the first time they had witnessed Marcus's behavior without the filter of their favoritism. Has he always spoken to you that way? I asked quietly. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. It's been difficult since the business failed. He's under a lot of pressure. That's not what I asked, I said. My father sighed heavily. It's gotten worse over the years. We just thought he was going through phases, that he'd mature. The admission hung between us, pregnant with implications. I took a deep breath and decided to speak my truth plainly. What you allowed to happen in our home wasn't normal, and it wasn't okay, I said. I was a child who needed protection and support, and instead, I was treated as less important, less worthy of love and consideration than Marcus. Do you understand what that does to a person? My mother began to cry quietly. My father, after a long pause, nodded slightly. "We thought we were being fair," he said. "We thought you were stronger, more self-sufficient, that you didn't need as much attention." "Everyone needs to feel valued, Dad," I said. "Everyone needs to know they matter." In that moment, looking at my broken parents, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just sadness for all we had lost. The family we could have been, the relationship we might have had. "I'm not going to give you money directly," I repeated. "But I am willing to help in other ways if you're willing to do some things differently going forward." They looked up at me, a mix of relief and wariness in their expressions. "What kind of help?" my father asked. I outlined my terms. I would connect them with a financial advisor who specialized in debt restructuring and bankruptcy protection. I would pay for an initial consultation with a family therapist for them, not Marcus, unless he chose to participate. And I would consult with a lawyer I knew about the lawsuit from Trevor to understand their legal exposure. "But my conditions are non-negotiable," I added. "If you want any relationship with me going forward, you need to attend therapy. You need to acknowledge what happened in our family. And you need to stop enabling Marcus's destructive behavior." My mother looked ready to protest, but my father placed his hand over hers. "We'll think about it," he said. It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance I might have hoped for, but it was more than I had expected. As we prepared to leave, my father hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small worn envelope. "We brought this," he said awkwardly. "We thought you might want it." Inside was a photograph I had never seen me, at about 16, focused intently on a drawing I was working on, unaware of the camera. It was a rare moment of captured joy from a time I mostly remembered as painful. "Your mother kept some of your art," he added. "The pieces that survived. We could send them to you if you want." It was a small gesture, almost insignificant, against the backdrop of years of neglect. But it was something, an acknowledgement that they had in some small way seen me after all. "I'd like that," I said quietly. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, there were no tearful embraces or dramatic declarations of love and forgiveness. Just a tentative handshake, a nod of recognition, and the first fragile thread of what might, with time and effort, become a new kind of relationship. True to my word, I connected my parents with a financial advisor named Sarah, who specialized in helping people navigate severe debt crises. I paid for the initial consultation as promised, but made it clear that any ongoing professional fees would be their responsibility. I also introduced them to Arthur Winters, a family lawyer I knew through professional connections, who could advise them on the legal implications of the business failure and potential bankruptcy. My parents' initial response to these resources was mixed. They seemed grateful for the practical help, but hesitant about the therapy requirement. "We're not really therapy people," my mother said during one of our now weekly phone calls. "Can't we just work on our relationship directly?" "The therapy isn't just about our relationship," I explained. "It's about understanding how the family dynamics affected everyone and learning healthier patterns for the future." After some resistance, they agreed to attend at least 3 sessions with the therapist I recommended. To their credit, once they started, they continued beyond those initial appointments. Marcus, as I had expected, refused to participate in any part of the process that didn't involve direct financial assistance. When he learned that I wouldn't be simply writing a check to solve the problems, he dismissed my help as useless and continued to blame everyone but himself for the situation. The financial advisor helped my parents understand their options, which weren't easy but were better than they had feared. They would need to sell their house, but with proper negotiation with creditors, they might avoid bankruptcy. The process would be lengthy and difficult, but not impossible. About a month after our meeting in Boston, I received an unexpected package from my parents. Inside was a cardboard portfolio containing salvaged pieces of my artwork from high school and earlier sketches, paintings, and digital prints I had assumed were long gone. My mother had included a note. "I always kept these. I'm sorry I never told you how talented you were." It was a small acknowledgement, but it cracked something open inside me. The idea that some part of her had seen and valued my work, even if she hadn't been able to express it at the time, was both painful and healing. Over the next 6 months, a careful rebuilding began. Our conversations remained mostly practical. At first, updates on the financial situation, the house sale preparations, the therapy progress. But gradually, more personal elements began to weave in. My father asked about my job, showing genuine interest in my design work. My mother inquired about Rachel, listening attentively when I shared stories about our relationship. What surprised me most was watching them begin to set boundaries with Marcus for the first time. When he continued living in their house without contributing financially or helping with the preparations to sell, my father finally took a stand. "If you're going to stay here, you need to help out and get a job. Any job," he told Marcus during a phone call I overheard. "We can't support you anymore." Marcus's response was predictably explosive, but for once my parents didn't back down. Within 2 weeks he had moved out temporarily, staying with a friend, while loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about how his family had abandoned him in his time of need. Watching this shift in my parents was both vindicating and deeply sad. Part of me wanted to say, "See, this is what I dealt with my entire childhood." But the more mature part recognized that they were already carrying enough guilt and regret without me adding to it. My own feelings throughout this process were complex and often contradictory. Some days I felt compassion for my parents, seeing them as flawed people who had made devastating mistakes but were trying to make amends. Other days the old hurt and anger would surge back, especially when they would occasionally slip into familiar patterns, minimizing Marcus's behavior or making excuses for him. Rachel was my anchor through it all, offering perspective when I lost mine and reminding me that healing isn't linear. "You're allowed to have mixed feelings," she assured me. "You can be compassionate toward them and still maintain your boundaries." 6 months after our Boston meeting, my parents sold their house and moved into a small rental apartment. It was a difficult transition after 35 years in the family home, but also seemed to represent a fresh start. They were working with the financial advisor to negotiate settlements with creditors, and while they would be living modestly for years to come, they had avoided the worst-case scenarios. During this time, Marcus made one half-hearted attempt at reconciliation, not with me, but with our parents. Facing his own financial difficulties and the collapse of his marriage, he showed up at their new apartment with a story about how he had learned his lesson and had a new business idea that just needed some startup capital. To my surprise and relief, my parents declined to invest. "We love you," my mother told him, "but we can't keep rescuing you financially." It was a fundamental shift in the family system, perhaps the first time Marcus had heard no from them and had it stick. A year after the coffee shop meeting, Rachel and I invited my parents to dinner at our home. It was the first time they had visited, and I watched with a mixture of amusement and residual anxiety as they took in our life together, the comfortable home, the evidence of our successful careers, the photographs of our trips, and friends. "You've built a good life," Ethan, my father, said quietly as we sat in the living room after dinner. There was no resentment or jealousy in his tone, just a simple acknowledgement. During dessert, Rachel and I shared our news we were expecting a baby in the spring. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "A grandchild," she whispered. "I never thought." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear: she never thought she would have a relationship with me again, let alone be part of my growing family. "We'd like you to be involved," I said carefully, "but things will need to be different than they were when I was growing up." They both nodded, understanding the subtext. The cycle would not continue with my child. As they prepared to leave that evening, my father hesitated at the door. "I know we can't undo the past," he said, "but I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become, not because of your success or money, but because of your character. You're a better man than I was." It wasn't a Hollywood moment of perfect reconciliation. There was still so much unsaid, so many years of pain, that couldn't be erased with a few months of effort. But it was something real and true, a foundation we could potentially build upon. In the months and years that followed, our relationship continued to evolve. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. There were moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there was also growth and genuine connection that I had never experienced with them before. Marcus remained on the periphery, drifting in and out of contact depending on his needs and moods. I maintained firm boundaries with him, which he respected only when it suited him. I had accepted that he might never change substantially, and that was okay. My well-being no longer depended on his recognition or approval. The journey taught me that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past or pretending the harm never happened. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment so you can move forward. I didn't forgive my parents for their sake. I forgave them for mine, and for the sake of my future child, who deserved a father unburdened by old wounds. The family dynamics that shaped my childhood left deep marks, but they no longer defined me. I had broken the cycle by recognizing the patterns, doing the difficult internal work of healing, and consciously choosing a different path. The scars remained, but they had become part of my strength rather than my weakness. As I prepare to become a father myself, I carry this hard-won wisdom. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, boundaries, and unconditional love that uplifts rather than diminishes. It's about seeing each person as they truly are, and valuing them for their authentic self, not for how well they fit into predetermined roles or expectations. The most powerful thing we can do is to acknowledge our pain, honestly break the cycles that hurt us, and build something better for those who come after us. That's the legacy I choose to create. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't see your worth? What helped you find healing after family trauma? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building a life on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the strength and compassion you bring to the world.